Are you looking to get better at playing Kylo Ren? Well, in today's video, we are doing a deep dive into the Kylo Yellow Deck. We're learning the deck strategies and how to win. First up, we have Kylo Ren, our leader. He's a 4-cost leader, which means he is able to flip into a unit on turn 4. So his action, we've got discard a card from your hand, give a unit +2/+0 for this phase. So with this deck specifically, we plan to utilize this action a lot. It's important to note that when you do use this action, your opponent is able to react. So whatever unit you give +2 to, then your opponent has the potential chance to attack. So it's important to make sure that when you do use this action, that you are targeting a unit that your opponent basically can't interact with. So for the most part, that is attacking. However, there are events in the game that could also target a unit of yours. So in this deck, the yellow deck, we plan to play a lot of space units, and a lot of other decks don't really play space units as much. So we're able to target our space units with the +2, and for the most part, hope that they're safe. Kylo flips into a 5/4 that has an ability that says this unit gets -1 for each card in your hand. So ideally on turn 4, you have emptied your hand. You have no cards left, and so Kylo Ren will be a 5/4. As a 5/4, he's able to attack in pretty aggressively on turn 4, dealing that 5 damage. However, if he is a 4/4, that's fine. Important to note here that his ability directly influences how many cards you're going to have left in your hand. So make sure to use that ability as often as necessary to make sure Kylo flips into that 5/4. The bigger he is, obviously, the better that is for you. Dealing more damage is ideal. So why are we playing yellow? The main reason to play yellow is that we have access to the game's kind of best aggressive space units. So in this version, we plan to try to dodge our opponent's ground units and play some of the better space units. Because we're hoping to avoid our opponent's space units, our units get to attack in more often. So let's take a look at the deck. Starting with the ground units, we have Death Star Stormtrooper, a 3/1, and we've got Greedo, also a 3/1, with a when defeated trigger. These are our aggressive 1-drop units. We also have Reckless Gunslinger. You can play this on 1, however, it does have the smuggle ability. It's important to note in this deck, because we're really not fighting over the ground itself, these units tend to die pretty easily, especially with the 3/1 stat line. What we're really hoping to do is attack in at least once with these units so that we could deal that 3 damage. The fact that they're 1-drop units also means that we can find time to play them later on the curve, or if later in the game we decide that they aren't as relevant, maybe our opponent has built up a sizable ground unit, we can go ahead and discard those to our Kylo Ren ability. So they're never dead. Also with Reckless Gunslinger, when played, you deal 1 to each base. It's only a 2/1, but we really like that when played ability to be able to deal 1 direct damage to our opponent. Also with Smuggle 3, it's very easy to resource this early and then flip our Kylo with no cards in hand, and then later on in the game, we still have cards to play. So the Smuggle cards are extra important with Kylo Ren because, again, we're looking to discard our hand, but then the next few turns, we definitely have more options by being able to play our recently drawn cards or our smuggle cards. The last ground unit we have is Migs Mayfeld. I personally really love this unit. It's a little weaker in this version because we don't have the ability to fight very well on the ground. However, the ability to discard a card and deal 2 damage to a unit or a base, I think is too strong to not play this card. Our leader obviously discards cards, so it's very easy to trigger Migs Mayfeld. And in this version, we're really looking to hit the base. We're definitely looking for opportunities to take out our opponent's weaker unit. So if we're able to deal 2 damage to a 3/2 space unit, for example, that's obviously very ideal for our deck. However, we don't have the synergy that we did with the aggression version of Kylo, where we're able to play Migs, discard a card, deal 2 damage to a unit, and use our Tarkin Town to finish off that unit. We basically did that to protect our ground units. However, in this case, this deck is looking to play more in space, so we don't have to do that. The synergy between Migs Mayfeld and Kylo Ren, I think is just too good to ignore. It's important to note with Migs Mayfeld that if they are playing into the ground unit and into the ground arena and they have a lot of presence there already, feel free to just resource Migs. Don't play this into opponents' units that they can easily attack Migs. Don't expect Migs to last long. Play Migs when you are hoping your opponents aren't able to play units quickly into the ground arena, because this will be the first unit that they attack, and as a 2/2 stat line, it's honestly not the best. Okay, so taking a look at our space units, like I said, the reason that we're playing yellow is that we're able to play our more aggressive space units. So first up, we have our 1-drop here. We've got a 2/1 in space. So you can notice right away that the stat lines for the ground units tend to be bigger. So we've got Death Star Stormtrooper, a 3/1 for 1, and we've got the TIE Fighter, a 2/1 for 1 in space. So in general, you'll find that the space units are typically a little weaker, and that prompts a lot of players to want to play the better, more powerful ground units, and that basically leaves us open to be able to attack multiple times with our weaker space units. So even though they are weaker, the fact that we're trying to leverage the fact that we're able to attack multiple times means that they're able to deal their damage. We're playing an aggressive deck, and so we want to be able to deal as much damage per unit as we can. The fact that it's a 2/1 for 1, if it attacks twice, we're dealing 4 damage versus the Death Star Stormtrooper only attacking once would deal 3 damage. Another important note is that as a 1-drop, it's easy to find a place to play this 1-drop later in the curve. So if on turn 3 we have 4 resources, we can play a 3-cost unit, and then we can play a 1-cost TIE Fighter too. So it's really beneficial to play the 1-drops not only for aggression, but we can find time to play them alongside other plays later in the game as well. So we've got Cartel Spacer here also, so we're playing a lot of cunning units. And as a 2/3, it's not the most aggressive, and honestly, it's not my favorite card in the deck. I'd be looking to cut this if I could. However, 2/3 isn't terrible, and it has an ability that could be relevant against other aggressive decks. It says when played, if you control another cunning unit, you can exhaust an enemy unit that costs 4 or less. So not the most aggressive. It does attack for 2 and could potentially tap down an opposing unit that could attack one of your space units, which means you get another turn with them in play. Next up, we have Kylo's TIE Silencer. So this is a 3/2 unit in space that costs 2. If this unit was discarded from your hand or deck this phase, play it from your discard pile. So you do have to pay for its cost, but this is a way to use Kylo's ability to give a unit +2, and then you're able to play the card from your discard pile. So you're able to get the benefit of discarding a card, and you get to play the card. So a 3/2 in space for 2 is a very aggressive stat line. You're able to play this as early as turn 1 if you really wanted to. I've definitely done that in games. You don't have to wait for the discard synergy to be able to play this card. Feel free to just run it out on turn 2. We're also playing the 3/2 Mercenary Gunship. So you'll see that this is a basically unaffiliated unit, so anybody could play this card. It is a 3/2 for 2. It does have an action. It says take control of this unit. Any player may use this ability. So it is a negative. Your opponents are able to take this, and sometimes they will, because that's a way for them to attack your space units. So let's say you played Kylo's TIE Silencer, and then you played Mercenary Gunship, and then your opponent takes this. They can now attack your gunship into your TIE Silencer because they own the gunship, and then take out both of your units. So definitely something to pay attention to. The action of your opponent taking control of this is definitely powerful. But we're hoping that we can leverage the fact that our opponents won't have time to take this, and then we can attack with a powerful 3-power unit in space as early as turn 1. Next up, we have the Lurking TIE Phantom, a 2/2 with Raid 2. It says this unit cannot be captured, damaged, or defeated by enemy card abilities. So that last ability is huge against a lot of the removal-based deck. Just as it reads, if the card deals damage or it says defeat on it, the Lurking TIE Phantom doesn't get removed from play. If there's a card that gives you the option to defeat one of your units, you can still choose this one and it won't be defeated. And it is attacking as a 4/2. So for 3, it's attacking as a 4/2. And against certain decks, again, the more controlling decks have a real tough time killing this card. They basically have to attack it. There is another way to defeat it, however. So if you're able to give it -X, -X, so if you give it -2, -2, that does count and is able to defeat it. So a common way an opponent might have that is the Luke Skywalker 7-drop. So it would give -3, -3, which would be a way to have them take out the Lurking TIE Phantom. But against other control decks, this is a very hard card for them to beat. So feel free to run this out early. Basically blank all of your opponent's removal, especially when it comes to this card. You'll probably have other units in play, so they can of course target them. But just note that this card cannot be defeated by enemy abilities and damaged by enemy abilities. We've got the 7th Fleet Defender. This is one of the more powerful space units and definitely a good reason to be playing Cunning. So for 3, we have a 3/2 shielded unit. The fact that our opponents can't just attack into this and defeat it is huge. The shielded token makes the 7th Fleet Defender a great target for our +2 discard ability. So our opponents aren't easily able to just attack into this unit. Shielded doesn't stop those destroy cards that we were just talking about. So make sure when you suspect that your opponent has one of those defeat cards that you're not doing that play. But against any of the space units attacking it, it is a great unit to have. Next up, we have Ruthless Raider. So for 6, the Ruthless Raider is a 4/6. When played and when defeated, deal 2 damage to an enemy base and 2 damage to an enemy unit. So the reason we're playing this is a combo with Triple Dark Raid, so we'll get to that in a second. However, when this comes into play, it deals 2 damage to a base, and when it attacks, it's dealing 4. So effectively, this is dealing 6 if you're able to Triple Dark Raid it into play. It also deals 2 damage to an enemy unit, so if you're able to get a unit damaged where the 2 damage is relevant, consider playing to be able to defeat that unit. And that does come up quite a bit. This is probably my favorite Triple Dark Raid target. We're also playing Xanadu Blood, also 6-drop, 4/6. It's got Raid 2, so it attacks as a 6/6. When played and on attack, you may return another friendly non-leader underworld unit to its owner's hand. If you do, exhaust an enemy unit or resource. So this is good at tapping down opponent's leaders for the turn or any other threat that may potentially destroy one of your attacking units. So we'll get to Triple Dark Raid in a second, but basically both of these are looking to come down as early as turn 4. So we're able to get a big attack swing in on turn 4 for that 6 damage, and then it'll return to our hand. We're also playing several units in our deck with the Underworld. So we've got Cartel Spacer, we've got Mercenary Gunship, we're also playing MiGs, Reckless Gunslinger, Greedo, and so we're playing a lot. We're playing over 20 units that we could potentially return with the Xanadu Blood's ability. Next up, we're looking at our events. So we're playing 1 Daring Raid. So just being able to deal 2 damage to a unit or a base is a good flexible card. We're only playing 1 because in our deck, any card can deal 2 damage by discarding it to Kylo. So the damage directly to a base or to a unit isn't as flexible. However, the ability to just pay 1 to deal that 2 damage and potentially knock out an opposing space unit. 3/2, maybe they have a Mercenary Gunship on their side and they're planning to attack into ours. This is a way to remove that unit without having to use our unit. We're also playing Sneak Attack. So Sneak Attack is a good way to get in additional damage. So Sneak Attack says play a unit from your hand. It costs 3 less and enters play ready. At the start of the regroup phase, defeat it. So again, we're playing a very aggressive deck here. So the hope is that by sneak attacking in one of our units, we're just able to defeat our opponent that turn, or we're able to leverage the fact that we would rather play 2 cards to deal 3, 4, 6 damage. In our deck, we're willing to use those 2 cards to be able to deal that damage. So common sneak attack targets would be our 6-drops here with Xanadu Blood and Ruthless Raider. However, don't be afraid to sneak in a Lurking TIE Phantom or any of our units to be able to just deal that damage. So we've got Surprise Strike next. Attack with a unit gets +3 for this attack. So this is a way to pump our unit and to cheat in action and use that unit right away to attack. So Surprise Strike really strong in this deck specifically because we're trying really hard to get our opponent's life total low very quickly. We're playing Triple Dark Raid, so another reason to play Cunning specifically. This card says search the top 7 cards of your deck for a vehicle and play it. Put the other cards on the bottom of your deck in a random order. It costs 5 less and enters play ready. Return it to its owner's hand at the end of the phase. So we're playing a lot of vehicles because we're playing a lot of space units. And ideally, we want to hit our Ruthless Raider and our Xanadu Blood with this. I think Ruthless Raider is a better target in general, but they both deal 6 damage the turn that you Triple Dark Raid them in an attack. So they're both good. It's important to note here, it says it costs 5 less and enters play ready. So if we play the event for 3, and we want to choose Ruthless Raider or Xanadu Blood, we have to have 4 resources available. 3 to play the card, and then 1 to play the remaining resource necessary. So make sure you're not just playing this card on 3. With that said, though, don't be afraid to play the card on 3 because you may want to hit another space unit, get in that damage, and then it'll bounce back to your hand. Another thing to note is our leader cares about cards in hand, so make sure that the turn that you play this, again, turn 4 is ideal. Turn 4 is also the flip turn for Kylo, so make sure that you consider the fact that your unit is going to be bouncing back to your hand for the next turn because Kylo's attack is going to be reduced when that happens. So you're going to draw 2 cards, and then this bounces back, so Kylo goes from being a 5-4 to a 2-4, and then your opponents are easily able to attack into that Kylo that next turn. So just something to be aware of. The biggest thing, though, is to make sure that this card should be played on turn 4 so that you can get Ruthless Raider and Xanadu Blood as options. Another play option that you can do is to play Triple Dark Raid on turn 5. And the reason you do that is because you can play this card, choose Ruthless Raider, attack with it, deal your 6 damage, 2 from it coming into play, 4 from it attacking. At the end of the turn, Ruthless Raider bounces back to your hand, and then next turn you have 6 resources so you can go ahead and play it again. So you can do the same thing with Xanadu Blood. So there's a chance that you might not get Ruthless Raider or Xanadu Blood in the top 7 cards. That's not the end of the world. It's not ideal, but make sure that you choose a unit that's going to be able to deal your damage and understand that that card is bouncing back to your hand. Also, the fact that it is bouncing back to your hand means there's another card that you can choose to discard with your Kylo. Last up, we've got our upgrades. We've got Armed to the Teeth here. Attach unit gains on attack. Give another friendly unit +2 for this phase. This card gives +2, and it has Smuggle 4. So this is another great card to resource early and then be able to smuggle it out later. I find that I don't end up having the time to play this card very often, especially if I've resourced it early. However, to be able to play the card is a great option later in the game. So if you have a lot of units, it's obviously dealing an additional 4 damage with 2 attacks. You're able to, again, place it on a space unit, and hopefully that space unit has no opposing space units to be able to attack this. So make sure you're playing this in a spot that you think your unit is going to be able to attack, and you're going to be able to give that +2 to another unit, and then that unit's going to be able to attack too. So finally, we've got Fallen Lightsaber. So Fallen Lightsaber is obviously ideal on Kylo himself. So on turn 4, you're able to flip Kylo. You're able to equip the Fallen Lightsaber, and he's attacking for 8 damage. If you've got no other cards in your hand. Kylo's a force unit, so on attack, you're going to deal 1 damage to each ground unit the defending player controls. So when you're able to play your Fallen Lightsaber on your Kylo, you make him huge, and there's not a lot of opposing units that are able to take him out very easily once he's got his lightsaber, especially on turn 4, turn 5. Those are the turns that you're really trying to just attack in for huge chunks of damage, and then after that, it's okay that he's defeated. It's also important to note here that Fallen Lightsaber is not unique, so if you had to, you can equip 2 Fallen Lightsabers to Kylo. It does happen every once in a while. However, I find that if I'm already attacking with 1 Fallen Lightsaber on Kylo, I'm doing really good. So I tend to resource the second Fallen Lightsaber. Also note that the Fallen Lightsaber pumps up toughness as well, so we add +3/+3, so it makes it a lot harder for our Kylo to be defeated by ground units. Kind of another point with this deck, you're not playing a lot of ground units, so it's important to note when your opponent is playing ECL. If our opponent is playing ECL, I tend not to play ground units in general. So I never really want to give them a target for their ECL. If we don't play ground units, they tend to not have great targets for their ECL. So again, using Poe as an example, because Poe can discard a card to deal 2 damage, that often means that they're able to deal that 2 damage to one of our space units. But if we don't have anybody on the ground side to be attacked, they have to play the Poe, and then we can kind of plan for it on the following turn to make sure maybe we attack with our 3/2 right away, or maybe a couple other things to note. We are playing a base without an ability, so our base starts at 30 life, which is a huge benefit when we're playing against other aggro decks. So we're trying really hard to beat our opponents as fast as possible, and most of the aggro decks, so we've got Sabine with ECL, we've got other Kylo decks that play Tarkin Town, other aggressive decks playing Tarkin Town. Basically any aggro deck that plays a special base is going to be at 25 and you're at 30. So that makes it a lot easier for you to be able to deal your damage first. Another thing to keep in mind is the fact that you're playing a lot of units, which means you have a lot of actions to attack with those units, which means your opponent is probably going to be claiming initiative a lot. So just make sure that you understand that when you play your units and you play your game. Understand that because you're playing a lot of your units, your opponent is going to be able to have the first action on the following turns, most likely. Play accordingly. It's tough to give specific examples, but just kind of consider what your opponent can do on their first action and try to play your best to counter whatever, the best thing that they can be doing is. That's also another key factor for aggro decks, is that we're able to play all of our cards very quickly. We're able to utilize a lot of our resources very quickly, and we're able to use multiple actions to be able to deal a lot of damage to our opponent. If we play a long game, our opponents have bigger, better cards than us, so we're really looking to try to get them dead as soon as possible. But the flip side is, because they're playing 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 resource cards, if we're able to defeat them on turn 6, they never really had a chance to play those cards. So a lot of times those cards will just basically rot in their hand. And that's kind of a key factor why you'd want to play aggro. So if we take a look at the curve, we're playing 13 1-drops, we're playing 19 2-drops, we're playing 12 3-drops, and this is basically our curve. So of course we do end up going to 6 with our Xanadu Blood and Ruthless Raider. This curve means that you don't have to keep resourcing if you don't want to. Obviously, depending on the game, if you want to end up playing one of your 6-drop space units, then you can get to 6 resources. However, I'll find some games where I'll just play 4 resources and then I'll just stop. And that's a big benefit to the Kylo deck, because we're able to play both of our cards after, let's say turn 4 we empty our hand, and then on turn 5 we have 4 resources, but we drew a 3-drop and a 1-drop. Well, we're able to play both of those cards, and our opponents are still resourcing cards, which means they're only effectively drawing 1 card a turn, but we're drawing 2 cards a turn. Definitely dependent on the game itself. However, don't be afraid to stop resourcing after turn 4. Definitely resource up to turn 4 though, because the Kylo flip is huge. We definitely want to be able to flip and attack with our Kylo and deal that 4 or 5 damage. So that's kind of a deep dive into how to play the Kylo Yellow deck. If you have any other questions on this deck or any of the cards in this deck, please leave a comment. I'd love to answer them. If you haven't already, make sure to check out the Kylo Yellow videos that we have up on the channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.